Good afternoon, everyone. This is Arif Qureshi with ICS. And again, thank you for joining us on a special day. I know with the MEA weekend coming up, we couldn't do it Friday, but looks like we've got a good group of people attending. Just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover, and I think this is pretty important, I think, as we go through some of the updates and changes that are occurring right now in terms of the transmission. And I think we felt it would be important to really focus on what each of these school districts are doing in terms of communication, in terms of what's working well with the communication, and what they're planning for the future. So you will get a really good chance to dig in deep into exactly what each of these districts are doing and how things are working for them. I think the best approach to this, I've always told people, is when you're dealing with these kind of challenges, it's better to imitate than innovate. So, make sure that you download this PowerPoint and look at all the examples and ideas that people have on how to move this thing forward. We're also really excited to get the opportunity to listen to Todd Rapp from Rapp Strategies, who's a communication and public relations specialist. And I think really talking about the key aspects of communication and exactly what you need to be doing and how you need to do it and how do you adapt to some of the new changes that are coming, I think will be very, very helpful. We do also have Neil Carlson from the University of Minnesota. He'll give you a quick update on exactly what the University of Minnesota is doing going forward. And I think in the future ones, we will discuss a little bit more around the fact that we are going to have some additional testing capacity in the state, along with saliva testing, and then also potentially testing where you can get kits at home, which is really a big game changer if that happens. And I think it's going to change in terms of how the new protocols will play out for the school district. Maybe not this winter, but for sure when you start going into spring, what the plan will be going forward. So lots of changes coming, lots of updates. So hopefully you'll get a chance to download this as we move forward. So Fred, if you got a few other comments on this?
Well, thanks, Arif. I would second that. You're going to see some really great examples of communication here and so you are going to want to download this and look in more depth at those. But you've been in the grind for 6 weeks with COVID and opening and changing, and now's the time to kind of take a step back. This presentation was put together at your request. This was the #1 request from our participants that we focus more on communications. So this is not going to go into numbers. This is not the day-to-day stuff, but the things you do ongoingly, every day, all week, and good examples. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Lutz, Superintendent in Bemidji.
Thank you, Fred and Arif, and thank you for joining us, everybody. Good afternoon. Communication is something that I don't claim to be an expert on. I'm still learning, and it's amazing how much I have learned over the last 6 months when it comes to communication. But one thing I do remember from a class that I took in college on communication, a number of classes I took actually, is that no matter what you do, you are communicating something. And in fact, you cannot not communicate, a double negative there, but you can hole yourself up in your office and refuse to answer emails and phone calls, but by so doing, you still are communicating something. You're communicating a lack of regard for the people you work with. You're communicating disengagement. So communication happens all the time, and we're all learning. But what I would like to do is just share a few things about ways that we're trying to do our best to communicate and to stay ahead of the game, to be proactive with our provision of information to the community and to staff members in our school district here, and how we're providing that information as much as possible and in as timely a manner as we can. Obviously, one of the most common ways that we all communicate in our businesses and in our schools is web-based communication. So I did throw that in there as a brief slide, but as we all talked about early on in this pandemic, we have our safe opening plans on our websites. But what I would point out is the importance of continuing to update the information. A web page often becomes a static place, and I go to web pages and see that it hasn't changed in years. It's important to keep the information updated. So we have our district website with pertinent information. All of the school websites, the school buildings, have updated websites constantly. They each have a website with information that's constantly changing. That is important. Something else that I consider to be a web-based communication tool or platform is the SkyAlert messaging, mass emailing and mass phone calling system. And in a normal year, I use that maybe for weather and for a few other situations having to do with the beginning of the school year. So in a good year without weather issues, I might use it 2 or 3 times. I've used that probably a dozen times this year since the beginning of the pandemic. And in fact, I'm using SkyAlert to send out an email message to all parents and all ISD 31 staff members about some of the new guidance we've been receiving about the different points that we use, data points, in determining what we need to look at for a model change, making a model change in our learning models in our district. I'm getting a lot of questions. That's telling me people want to know, when are we changing models? What are the criteria we use? And so I'm doing my best to communicate that through the newspaper last weekend, through the radio coming up this Monday, but also through a letter that's written to very succinctly, I hope, to help these people understand what we're looking at, to answer those questions. It won't answer all the questions, but it'll be a good start. And then YouTube, we're working with YouTube channels to constantly put YouTube links on our website so that we can make sure people have a clear messaging from the superintendent, or this example here is a board meeting where Dr. Wilcox from Sanford shared for about 10 or 12 minutes with a PowerPoint about his confidence in the school district to have school without becoming a super spreader. So we keep those on our websites as well. Getting into the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of team communication and support. And I use the word support because without communication, you're robbing people of the support that they need. And sometimes support itself is communicating that you care about the people you work with. So I'm in constant communication daily, hourly, with my district cabinet team, which is 4 other team members. And together, I see us as a 5-pronged or 5-headed superintendent, and we work very closely together. And I'll often run things by them to get their angles on situations, and it's very valuable. Without doing that, I would be lost, I think. Our district leadership team and our principals are a group that we used to meet with every other week in person. Now, generally, we meet virtually, and we meet every single Tuesday morning, usually for a couple of hours to answer questions, to provide updates, to ask for input from the very people who are in the trenches. And speaking of trenches, that 3rd bullet point of principals, they're the ones in the trenches right now. And for Principals Week last week, and we don't always just wait for a special occasion like that. We try to be proactive to let principals know that we appreciate what they do. The cabinet and I sent out gift certificates, and that's what that pink purple icon is. They're a gift certificate to a local coffee shop to thank them for all that they're doing to go above and beyond the call of duty during this difficult time. And they are burning the candles at both ends. Finally, part of my staff email that I'm going to send out this afternoon will be a YouTube video that I came across just yesterday. It's very, very powerful. I had to use Kleenex afterwards, and I would recommend that you do too. I'm sharing that link right now in the chat box, but if you haven't seen this video yet, it's just a very powerful thank you video sung by students who are thanking essential workers. And that does include nurses and doctors and first responders, but it also clearly thanks teachers for what they're doing. And the message is, you're doing a good job. And I would encourage you to take a look at that and to share that with your staff. Mass media communication, I'm fortunate enough, I didn't think it was a good thing when I first started here because I was very lacking in confidence. And it was new to me, coming from a small school district without even a newspaper, to be able to build a rapport with mass media reporters, and it is so important to do that. If you can build that connection and the support of the reporters and the people in your community who are the mass media outlets, the newspapers, the talk radio, sports radio, TV stations, it is crucial to get your word out. And where we can, we take the TV stories that we're able to run, the positive ones, and find the link and put them back on our websites so that they're there for a prolonged period of time so people can go back and look at the story in case they missed it when it first ran. The next story, or the next slide, I talk a little bit about, the importance of social media. I'm a boomer, and for me, it's taken a while to get the hang of social media, but I make no doubt about it. I know how important it is, and I know that our parents and our students are so linked to social media. So it's so crucial that we have an active district Facebook site. We have a district Facebook site for our referendum that we're running right now, and that's very active. Every school has a social media or district Facebook site. I have a Twitter feed that I don't use as often as I should, but I am ramping it up as much as possible just for messaging. And then another social media platform that we use is called Let's Talk through K-12 Insights. And it provides a unique opportunity for people to open up two-way communication. And it's much easier as a platform than tracking down the superintendent's email or the principal's email. You click on a link that says Let's Talk, it opens up a little page that looks like what you see there with different categories. So if you have a question about curriculum or sports or special education or buildings and grounds, you click that, it opens up a portal to ask your question, and it goes to the right people. So it's a very powerful communications tool. And finally, to wrap up, just want to talk a little bit about an idea I came across a couple days ago, and it was from another school district, and I'm not even sure if they're in Minnesota, but I saw this, and it is where students, juniors and seniors, put together a 3 or 4 minute video asking the community to hear us out. Please follow the guidelines of the CDC and the Department of Health. Please wear masks. Please don't gather in crowds, socially distance. Please do all the things that we need you to do so that we can have school. And I sent this idea to our high school video teacher. We have that class working on that video right now. And our plan is to branch out so it goes beyond the school. So it goes and includes the Boys and Girls Club, some of the charter schools, and some of the other groups in our community messaging that please, we want to have school. We want sports. We want music. Please do what we need to do, work together so that we can keep our schools open. So that's the newest thing we're doing. Stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll get that out in the next couple of weeks, and maybe I can share a piece of that clip with you all at a later date. And that's what we're doing in Bemidji. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tim. Those are all great ideas. And so now we're going to go from the largest district to the smallest of our three. So Andy, how are you communicating in East Central?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us again on this call. I learned so much from the other superintendents on this call, just like all of you. So I continue to take notes and steal ideas from these two gentlemen as well. So thanks to you guys for your participation in this. So if we jump into it, I mean, we have ramped up communications. It's like communications on steroids these days, right? Before this call, I was telling folks, in an average year, the community might hear from me in mass emails, let's say 4 or 5 times, depending on what's happening, right? We give them the state of the school, we give them the updates. If we're talking about facility plans, whatever it might be, they hear from us 4 or 5 times. And I'm finding that it's about a weekly communication these days. So somehow we've carved that out into our work schedules, and we're making it go. But I think now is the time, if you haven't already, for school leaders to really go back to formalize what their communication plans are. And for us, we go back to our COPE philosophy, create once and post everywhere. I mentioned this on one of the previous calls, but just to go into a little bit more detail, COPE might be a fitting name these days. We're just trying to cope. But for us, it really is the centerpiece for our communication strategy. What that means is if I draft a message, or if the principals draft a message, or if the food service director drafts a message, we're all able to share those messages, cut and paste the pieces we need for our own communications, put those on social media, whatever it might be, but really, let's create this once so we're not constantly reinventing the wheel. We don't have to go align our messages between the departments too, because we've all seen it and we all know what's happening. And so that helps streamline our communications big time. Some procedural considerations I think districts should really think about. Who hears the information first and who hears it second and third and so on? That's really a big deal. As Tim mentioned, we have weekly leadership team meetings where we sit down and much of our conversation focuses on communication. What are we going to tell people this week? And so I think it's important to take that leadership team, brainstorm, talk through what do they need to hear so that we can continue to operate and have kids in school. I think the theme there that we have in our district is, and I work with our leaders on this, I call it managing up. They need to tell me what's happening in their departments. If we have case concerns, if we have rumors, if we have things floating out there, manage up and tell me about it. And then when we push out communications, obviously that's starting with me as a superintendent. But that leadership team is a really important communication vessel as we look to what's next. As we draft communications with our leadership team and we push those to our staff, would be the next level. We are trying to give our staff at least one day ahead of any communication out to our parents and our community. We're sending that communication mostly via email, and we're reminding them that they're going to get regular updates. And again, they have about one day to make sure they've read it, if they have questions to ask their questions, and to get up to speed on what we are going to tell everybody else. And then from there, we push it out. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this looks like in mass and in even some of our individual conversations. The website, as Tim said, is serving as our hub for all communications. I joke with our leadership team that someday that's going to be my COVID-19 memoir, because we're going to have everything logged there that we can go back and say, how did this evolve in our school district? What did we tell people? And maybe we need to put that into some type of historical document and put it in a time capsule in our parking lot or something like that. But it is really our hub for communications. I think that, again, if we formalize our communications plan, we're viewing that website as the front door to our school. If anybody wants to know what's happening in East Central schools with COVID, or probably anything, they can open the front door and they can go look and see what's happening. What are we telling our people? Our staff were very loud and clear with us that they wanted regular and straightforward, honest communication. So they're getting a weekly email from me. I try to send that either Sunday night or right away Monday morning. Here's what's upcoming for the week. It's the predictions from public health with case rate numbers. It's what we heard over the weekend. Again, confidential information isn't shared, but the themes of where we're headed as a district this week, they're hearing directly from me. And we'll talk a little bit more about text groups coming up here. So we can go ahead to the next one, Aaron. All right, written communication. I have to start out with written communication by extending a thank you to my high school English teacher, Mrs. Green, because I have never written so much in my life. And without my high school AP English class, I'm not sure I would be able to survive what's happening right now. So shout out to Mrs. Green as my first order of business. Again, our website is our hub, and if you download this PowerPoint and click on the link, you'll go right to our Learning Models website. That is updated as much as possible. There's probably, if we dig deep, there's probably some old information, but I go into this every single day between myself and my administrative assistant. We go in and we try to make the updates based on what we're telling people this week. It's important to make sure that that's up to date because, again, that's that front door that we want people to see. As Tim mentioned, the mass communications and how do we push messages out, we use School Messenger. What we're using with our mass communications very heavily is the text and email portions of that. There's also a automated phone call we can push out. And for us, the automated phone call is those things that they have to hear right now. So again, that's a snow day decision, or if we had to shut down school because of a major outbreak with COVID-19, we'd be sending that phone call. But so far, we've been able to give people time to read their emails and read their text messages, and we've pushed it out that way. Just to talk about emails a little bit more, staff get that weekly email from me. Every single week, our public health department gives us the case rate number. We talk in detail about where the cases are located in our county, again, without people's names and all that. But I in turn draft a message to staff and share that information. And I've told them flat out, I'll be as honest as I can be. And that means it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, because they need to know what's happening. I'm sure schools still have staff members that are scared of the pandemic. We have some that want to ignore the pandemic and just go about our day. So they're going to hear directly from me the good and the bad and the ugly of what we're talking about each and every week. With our families, one of the things we want to make sure that we always be sure of is that not everybody's great about reading their email every single day. So when those emails go out, we want them put in our archive too, so they can go back and dig through and remember what we've been telling them and try to make sure that those emails are aligned correctly. Text messaging, for me and probably for everybody, texts are the quickest way to get people to know what's happening. At the end of our weekly phone calls with public health, I have 2 text messaging groups that I immediately send a text message to. The first is our leadership team. That includes all department leaders, principals, transportation, food service, everybody that's leading people. And you can see an example of the most recent one in green there. And that talked about our first positive case in the district. What are we going to do now? When were people exposed? How many people is it affecting? They need to know that information because the rumors are going to start to fly. And so they need accurate and quick information coming right to their cell phone. The other group that I text right away is our school board members. They're in blue there. I keep them up to date every single week after that public health phone call. And I have to remind them, and my job is to help them stay out of trouble too, that this is not meant to be a back and forth dialogue because of the open meeting law. This is about me sending them info. So we don't need responses. We don't need to get into a discussion. If they have questions, they call or they email. But this is strictly just hit them on their cell phone with what do we know today. And so those 2 text messaging groups have been a nice way for us to give it to them in real time. And then there's the old reliables, right? The letters home in backpacks in our elementary school, the letters we hand our kids, the announcements we put on the PA. Some of those old reliable things are still evident, and we still need to make sure that we're pushing those out. But it all gets pointed back to our COPE philosophy. It's the same message going out in all these different medias, and everybody's hearing the same thing. I think if you break it down, this is not a complicated process. We just have to make sure we stick to it and step through it each and every time that we're going to communicate. One last thing with written communications, make sure you have somebody proofread. Right before you send that, I run it by my administrative assistant with a strong English background, or find somebody else that reads it for you, just to make sure you don't slip up and have something that you don't want to say. And finally, social media. We've taken a big push with social media. I think we've reached a societal shift where we don't need to go watch the news anymore. The news finds us. And the news hits us on our cell phones with breaking coverage. You probably get that a lot on your cell phones. And I think it's important that the school district adopt that philosophy, that our news needs to hit people right where they are going to be all the time, and that's social media. And so you see an image of me right there on the right-hand side on Instagram. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I'll just throw a plug in. Please follow me. I'd love to add anybody on this call to my professional learning network, because I think I can learn a lot from you as well. So please follow me and I'll follow you back. This is meant for quick communications. It's not going to be perfect. I can tell you that. You can see in that image right there that I cut off half of my face. It's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be. We just need to make sure we get the information out to people and tell them where to find more information. If you follow me, you can go look at this video. What this video said was, hey, I want to make sure everybody has a great weekend, take the weekend to recharge, but also we're going to shift learning models on October 19th. So check your email and check our website for more information. It's really as simple as that. Come back to it. They're going to hear from me often, but it's going to be as straightforward and as quick as some of that information. When it comes to, just quickly, when it comes to social media, I want to comment on, we're all going to get negative comments posted on our social media accounts. I think it's important that you have a process for what happens when that gets posted. Well, what we find is that if there's a positive comment made, the line remains positive. So if there's somebody out there that posts something positive, just about everybody stays positive. But if some of the first questions or first comments are negative, then the whole chain usually goes kind of negative. So we have a practice in our district that if there's somebody that's out there with negative questions or spreading negativity, the people that run our social media accounts are directed to list my name and phone number and basically tell them that the superintendent would be happy to talk more about their concerns, because we want to make sure we're meeting everybody's needs. And I think that's a nice way to direct the attention away from some of the negative comments and get it back towards a positive, constructive way to have their voice be heard. And so I throw that out there as a strategy to make sure districts think through that before those negative comments get posted. And that's the central update. Thank you.
Well, Andy, that's excellent. You're certainly whitewater rafting in this 21st century communications rapids of instant communications and social media with really great advice. Well, Dan, that's a tough act to follow after Tim and Andy, but I know you're doing great things in Mora. So what's going on in Mora Communications?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm not really sure how I was able to be a panelist on this show, just because this is my first year of being a superintendent, and everybody asks, well, you picked a good year to be a superintendent your first year. And I think one of the things I share with everyone is that this is all new to all of us. So we're all trying to do the very best we can to navigate these waters. But I'll just try to share. Fred asked us to give you specific examples of what we're doing in our schools. And I think if there's something that we can learn from each other in education, is that we might as well share the wealth with each other, because there's a lot of great ideas. And one of the things I think that Tim mentioned and Andy mentioned, the importance of the website communication. Every other week I get together with our web people. We have a couple people on our communication team, and we take a look at our website and we say, okay, what needs to go? Where can we archive things? We want a lot of visuals for our families and for our staff. So we've tried to create some clear visuals with our learning plan, our return to school plan. And you can see that, people don't have to read the entire document to click to where they want to go. They want to find out more information about the hybrid model. They're able just to click on a link to the hybrid model. If they want to look for what about lunches, they can just click on lunches. So we call that kind of our gateway document. So if that's something you're interested in, there's a link to that. Another good tool that our school board members have appreciated is that quick reference guide, just because they're not into the day-to-day operations, and neither are parents. And so that's right on the front page of our website. So they can see what phase we're in and what that means for each of those different categories. So that's been an important tool for us, and we've had some good comments from our parents and our school board members. And if you're like Mora, we're in a hybrid pre-K-12. And so one of the ideas came from our principals, is like, let's create a calendar, because we have different groups of kids, A and B kids. So I know I've mentioned that before, but there's a link to it if you want to check it out and see what that might look like. Okay, the other thing that I'm learning as a superintendent this very first year is try to be consistent on the communication. So the scheduled communication, what I've tried to do is, unless it's more of an emergency type of situation, we've gone like every other week trying to update parents and staff members on more of a formal written letter and video, along with a skyward message, or I think we use Synergy actually in Mora now. So those messages that Tim and Andy talked about too, and just trying to hit them with as many different venues as possible, because everybody gathers and receives information differently. Our weekly district update goes out to all district employees and all families, and that's on the right-hand side there. There's a link to it. We use a program called SMORE, S-M-O-R-E. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It's a really good layout. It's clean, and we change that up every week, and we have somebody within our communications team that handles that. Of course, all of you are a lot wiser than I am, and you give your school boards weekly updates, and now it's becoming more daily. I think that Andy mentioned that, whatever forum that you're trying to keep the board updated, because so many different situations, whether it be a positive case or a case on the bus, or we had an athletic incident this week. So just trying to keep them informed so they are aware of the situations that are going on. I think Andy also mentioned those weekly team updates. And I guess what I've tried to do is update our entire team each week with just some bullets. Some of the topics that I've been trying to help our team is really self-care, taking care of yourself. Also, what is our current situation with COVID? Our county numbers, where are they going? What are we doing? Giving them some information on the MDE guidance, what they need to know as staff members. And also some positive things, like Tim mentioned, that video. So anything that we can do to support our staff, that's been important. Let's see, yeah, that's fine. You can keep going, Aaron. And then community communication. How do we push that out to the rest of the community? And, this is not rocket science. Facebook and Twitter, like Andy said, is extremely important for people to see what is exactly going on and how do we communicate what's going on inside of the school to the general public. So I try to keep an active Twitter account and try to post almost on a daily basis. And I'd be happy to try to connect with other superintendents. I know Andy, I follow Andy, and now I follow Tim, now that I know he's on Twitter as well. And then one of the things that I've tried to do, and you've probably done as well, is update the school board at every school board meeting on what is our current situation within the schools. And so the general public gets to hear that. Those are broadcast through YouTube. And then I have our principals give an update on where they're at and what's going on within their schools. So that's been well received by our school board, so they can hear it along with just those weekly updates. And then I will try to push out to the newspaper once a month on our current situation. And anytime there's a change in models, trying to let the newspaper know ahead of time. Some important tools that have been helpful for me just as a first-year superintendent, like Andy said, just making sure that you are not skipping over people and making sure that you're following kind of that chain of communication. I try to give the school board the first information and our admin team, and then it goes on to the staff, and then to the parents, and then to the news media. So I have a couple tools that I've created. If it helps you, have at it. And the process for the learning model transition is just, making sure that I don't forget a step along the way. So it's easy to do, especially in all the different situations that you're in. And being a first-year superintendent, it's easy to lose sight of what you need to do. So those are my ideas. I hope some of them help you, and I'm learning a lot along the way.
Great, Dan. And before we get to you, Todd, I'd like to let everybody know that people have been sending in some links in the chat, and Aaron is going to be looking at those and adding them as resources to the PowerPoint. So, and I want to thank people for sharing their resources. And if there's any questions, be sure to use the chat. I do have one question for Andy and Dan. Tim's had to leave us for a bit. These are great examples of communication, but how do you know you've been successful? How do you measure the success of your communications? Is it an informal process? Do you look at metrics? Maybe we'll start with Dan. How do you measure your success?
It's a great question. And I guess some of the things that I've been doing is, like the school board, especially, I ask them, how is the information coming? Is it too much? Is it too often? I know that sometimes when you text people, they think it's an emergency. So I just want to be real careful about making sure that they're okay with the type of communication, and then they've responded back to me. So I think number one, asking for feedback. I've asked our admin and our communication team, how do you perceive our communication? Do you feel it's adequate? Is it too much, not enough? Could we do something better? What's working, what's not working? The guy who does the YouTube videos for me and transfers them over, he gives me the metrics on how many people watch the YouTube. So I am gaining in popularity, probably not because I'm any better, but just because people are interested, more interested. And so those, and I've had some thank yous from staff just in being transparent and giving them information. So I think the number one thing would just be ask.
Okay, great, Dan. And Andy, how do you measure success?
Well, I'm not trending on YouTube like Dan is, but but I would say just to probably add on to what Dan said, I think feedback is really important. You know, we get feedback, again, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? If there's information that's lacking, as soon as we send an email to everybody, they tell us immediately. They respond with, well, yeah, but what about transportation? Or yeah, but what are you doing about keeping kids apart? So we've taken every single one of those and made sure that it's evolved our communication. So I think we've reached a point where when we tell people when we're going to communicate, and then we try to communicate it as clearly as possible, overwhelmingly, we're getting support from our community. I mentioned this last week, but really the small number of negative comments that are out there are really a tiny percentage. So I would watch, or we continue to watch, the number of those comments and any confusion that might be out there. And if that remains relatively small, I would call that success. When it comes to social media, you know, we monitor the number of people that follow our sites. We monitor the number of likes. We monitor the number of shares, because that just helps spread the web. We've even gone so far to have our social media gurus, the people that run it for us, ask people to do that. When you get information, please share it out, because that helps everybody know what's happening here. So that's what we've tried to do. And then I think success comes, probably no news is good news. And when we hear less, that means that people are informed.
Great, great. Well, Todd, these are great examples and great ways to measure success. So why don't you start with that question and then go on to what you want to highlight for people?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Fred. Let me start by saying is that I think, you know, there's a lot of metrics out there for how you can track opening rates of emails and track how people are, what they're doing on social media. But when I work with clients on the question of the impact of their communication, I try to get them to focus on two things. Number one, do people keep coming back to you as a trusted source? And that means both, are they looking at what you're saying, but also are they coming back to ask you questions? And we've talked a lot about feedback loops in these sessions. It's an important way of demonstrating that people trust you with the information that you're giving. And so as you're seeing an increase in not only the usage of your communication, but also as people are engaging in dialogues with you, that's an incredibly important measurement of the impact you're having. The second is that if you hear that what you're saying is being used elsewhere in the community, and that could be because people like or share information that you post out there, or it could be because people specifically steal your language. But one of the things as I'm working with clients, I tell them is that when your language and your way of approaching an issue is being used by others, then you're really having an impact. Now, I don't know that either one of those are what I call quantitative measurements, but they're important qualitative measurements to consider. We've talked a lot here about communications, and Aaron will stay on this slide for a second, for a few seconds here. You know, if you feel like you're spending more time communicating right now than maybe you ever have, congratulations. That's actually a good sign. I do a lot of crisis management work, but actually what I try to do more than that is crisis prevention work. I try to work with organizations as to how to keep things from being crises. And I tell them that my job is to make sure that you don't have crises, but rather you have bad days. And the best way of having bad days is, in other words, you've got to deal with a problem you didn't want to, but it's not going to take your school district and basically have it come to a halt. And the best way to make sure you have bad days rather than crises is, first of all, address these problems quickly, which all of you have been doing operationally. And secondly, communicate or even over-communicate. That's how you keep something from turning from a brush fire into a raging forest fire. And I was really happy to listen to what the superintendents were saying here. I mean, this is a remarkable amount of information that they're pushing out. but more importantly, a remarkable number of communications channels that they're using. I mean, think about right now how important cell phones, right, and the use of videos have become in our work, where maybe just several months ago we wouldn't have thought of those as necessarily a very important part of how we communicate. I'd also call out a few things that the superintendent said that just I want to make sure that they receive an extra point of emphasis. And that is early communication to staff, how critical it is that they have the information as early as possible. The importance of updating information, making sure that your website doesn't remain static, but rather it's constantly changing with events. And the final thing is the concept of strategic communications. And that is, anybody can think that they're communicating by putting something in their local newspaper and having it shared. But think about what Tim told you about how they use K-12 insights and Let's Talk. And I see this in all of the districts that are presenting on these COVID programs. Is that something that's very much focused on the stakeholders for the district, because that's a different type of communications than mass media is. Congratulations to all the superintendents for the work that you've done. Now I'm going to walk through a few slides, just on some things to think about as we're going forward. This first slide, my intent is to say that I think we've really narrowed in on 5 different objectives for communication. And this has evolved since the first session we had together. Precision, frequency, transparency, discipline, and then ultimately engagement. Those 5 have been probably the most important things that either the superintendents have talked about directly or that they've inferred in the conversations that we've been having. And you need to make sure that you are checking the box on all 5 of these in your communications every week. Because slipping obviously on any of these makes it more difficult for you to have that position as the experts and really the people who are driving the conversation in the community. Aaron? Now, looking ahead, we've all used this phrase, the new normal. But let's admit one thing for sure. We're not sure when that's going to be here and what it's going to look like. We do know we're getting smarter all the time. And I appreciate always having Neil on these, because I learn something new from Neil every time we get together, and usually several things. But we still don't know when we're going to have a widespread vaccine. We don't know when the state orders and the guidelines aren't going to be needed. And we don't know when our families and our staff and even our students are going to be comfortable. So we don't know what the new normal is going to be. And that means we have to continue to think and plan out for the different scenarios that may happen as this virus continues to affect our communities. And as we found out today, we're going to reach some high level marks in terms of both cases and deaths in the near future. And we have the tools to deal with it, but this is not going away. I also wanted to add that guidance continues to change. And if you haven't kept up to date with MDH and MDE and what they have been publishing in their planning guides, please continue to. In the most recent document, and as I went through it, I saw different changes in how you should review your transportation, hallway, and classroom spacing policies. There was much more specific requirements used on the use of face coverings and exceptions to their use. There was more specific requirements on cleaning and disinfectants, and new recommendations on water and ventilation systems. In all of these, communication is obviously an important part of that adaptation. Now, there weren't as many new communication requirements as we've seen in the past, but it's implied in each of these ways that you need to communicate the information out to your key stakeholders. Now, I'm going to end by highlighting 4 key concerns that I hope all of you are thinking about as you continue to work on your communications plans and carry them out over the next several months, maybe as much as a half a year. First concern is that you lose focus on education. And we've talked about this before, how the virus will someday be controlled. And in the short term, there's no question you're going to be evaluated on your management of the crisis itself. But in the long term, you're going to be evaluated on what the value your schools continue to bring to students in your communities. And it's important that even when it feels like you're getting lots of COVID information and you've got to push that out to the community, keep talking about what's working in your school district. It's critical for your long-term relationship. Now, the second concern is, please make sure that you become prepared. I'm concerned that you're unprepared for the worst case scenarios. And I don't have a chance to talk with every one of you every week, but I do know that one of the things that gets pushed off to the side is thinking about the worst that could happen coming up. Because frankly, you already feel like you're in a difficult situation. Why would you want to think of what might make it worse? The reason is because the more prepared you are, the more likely you're going to turn a crisis into simply a bad day. And I've listed a bunch of different things here that you should be thinking about. Particularly you superintendents in the audience. One of the things you should be thinking about is that if you have to have a prolonged absence, or board members have to have that, you need to have a backup plan. But the bottom two on the left side, maybe I'll highlight the most right now, because I think they're the most immediate. First of all, the weather's coming in. I've already got, Andy, it sounds like we're going to get our first drifts of snow on Saturday night up in Pine County. When the weather starts changing, it's just going to add a new layer of communication. And maybe you're just about to go back to in-school learning for some or all of your students, and then a snowstorm is going to hit. And you've got to be ready right away to step in, calm people down, let them know we're going to stay on the same path. But we do have to deal with these problems because we live in Minnesota. Another thing you need to think through is the disagreements between education leaders, that is all of you, public health leaders, and other local leaders. I think in some communities, you're going to see some continued pushback from local leaders about why the schools aren't more open and why other decisions aren't being made that look like they're more in balance with what those local leaders perceive as necessary for the community to stay healthy, not just in terms of their personal health, but in terms of business health and quality of life health. And it's important for you to think through how you can take those disagreements when they start to occur publicly offline, make them less public, and try to work through some level of agreement as to how all community leaders need to work together to communicate similar messages. It may not be easy to do, but as superintendents, I think it's critical. The third thing I'm concerned about is COVID-19 fatigue. People are going to easily become distracted or complacent over time. I hope people become a little distracted by the holidays when they happen, but they're also going to be just plain less attentive as this goes deeper and deeper into the winter. That means there are some very clear steps you can take which will help keep people's attention. Diversifying the location, timing, and tone of communication is one way. Involving other new and trusted leaders in the communications plan so they become strong communicators. Separate your changes in protocol from ongoing messaging. And what that I mean is that when something really has to be different, don't wrap it in a bunch of other messages. Say it very directly to your residents or your staff or your students or all of them, of course, and separate it from that ongoing COVID messaging that you have. It's important because not everything can be an alert, but when you use alert as a message, you should really be trying to deliver one piece of information to your residents. And then finally, keep answering the questions and concerns that you hear most. Finally, and I had a little concern about bringing this up just because, as you know, I'm involved in helping districts sometimes with referenda. But I wanted to still say to you that I know superintendents are thinking about a couple of different issues. They're hearing from residents, or maybe they're having difficulty explaining to residents that COVID-19 actually does impact the district budget. Even though kids may be at home, there are expenses that come with that affect the operating budget. That you occasionally get the question, so why are we worried anymore about school buildings? Everybody's at home learning, even though that we know that we're losing something by not having that day-to-day contact. Or even what kinds of indoor air quality investments are going to be important to actually reduce the spread of viruses. These are important questions, and I know some districts are going to be thinking about 2021, perhaps going out to referenda. Right now, you do not have to drop everything and begin your long-term planning. But what I do suggest is that you should be thinking about how to share the investments that you're making and the benefits they're bringing to show people the value in the changes you've made in the budget. You also need to start expressing the tough choices you're going to have ahead of you and be really honest about that revenue equation. When we have more students in our district, it means more state funding. And that's why we're working so hard to keep students connected, even if they don't feel like they can be in schools. The other thing is to begin building a team of educators and parents and business leaders to track both budget needs and, frankly, the investments that you may need to make in better health in your buildings, as well as the long-term investments in classroom education. It's not too early to take step one in this, and I won't suggest you have to take steps 2 through 5 to get moving until sometime next year. But if you're thinking you may have to go out, this is a very good time to communicate your value. So Fred, that's what I wanted to share today.
Well, that's great, Todd. And I know that in Bemidji, they're doing a referendum this year. So we wish them well in all the communication. Neil, opportunity for you to share a little out of your wheelhouse, talking about communications, but what's going on at the university? What can you share from your perspective from higher education?
It's very interesting. I really appreciate the discussion here with all of the districts and how they're really pushing forward on some of their communications. We've been trying to do similar things with us, and I think we're way behind the districts with respect to use of some social media such as Twitter and everything else. We're just finally starting to move forward on that. I think one of the things we're doing at the U, at least trying to communicate broadly, is that we're taking in information from all over the institution, from all the coordinate campuses. We send the information in to one person who's our director, Catherine Bonas, and then she sends out a district or a university-wide email that explains all the things everybody is doing. So it helps prevent, for instance, in a very large institution, having some spots that are siloed that don't know what's going on. And I think some of the discussions that we had with respect to some of the superintendents is trying to make sure that people get the information at the right time and who gets to see the information first. And in some of these things, it's just, this is information that can be widely shared and everybody kind of knows what's going on, so we aren't so siloed. So I think that's really, really important. I've also had the opportunity to talk with some students who are experiencing this, and they ended up being very forward in their particular district and writing a specific letter and letting the district know some of the concerns that they had. And I think the response from that particular district maybe not be as well as it could have been. They said, thank you very much for sharing your concerns, and they didn't say anything more. And I think that's not where we need to be. And I think that's some considerations that are going on. Another one is the recent study about some of the stress of this that's going on with some school teachers, and a significant number of them are considering, and this is kind of on a negative side, but are considering retiring. So what can we do as far as communication, as far as caring and feeding of these teachers? What can we do to take the stuff that's really not necessary on their plate and make it as easy as possible for them to focus on teaching? Because I've got some teachers that are essentially not sleeping very well and crying a lot. And that's very difficult for them to be good teachers if they're really short on sleep and really focused on some of the difficulties that they have trying to essentially, in some cases when they're doing dual teaching at once, trying to do 2 things at once and trying to do it well. And I really like what the discussion that we had last week where they said, it's okay to fail. It's okay to have that experience. You don't have to be perfect. And I think a lot of education, when I was going through, you had to have the right answer or you were a failure. No, that's not the case. We can experiment, and we can be curious. And my last piece is that we need to lean into problems. If we see a problem coming down the line, let's go after it. Let's not ignore it and hope it goes away, because that's a prescription for a bigger problem down the road.
Well, thank you, Neil. And I really want to thank the panelists and Todd this week. These are really great examples. And your question about when we, the stress on educators, we did a focus on that in one of the COVID conversations. And Aaron, if you could let me know what that is, because then the panelists could go back, attendees could go back and listen to that, because there's some really good advice and really good things that districts are doing. I don't see any questions in the chat window. And I can give you a heads up, next week, one of the focuses will be on testing. There's new information coming out about saliva testing. We'll ask the districts to talk about how they're addressing testing. Who do they test? When do they ask them to test? Who does it? And if there's any community testing coming up. And I think in the chat, there's been some information from Penny Holtz about some locations for community testing. So if any of the 3 districts have had a community testing event, we'd love to know how it went and how you did that. Erin can't remember offhand when we focused on mental health, but she'll add that as a resource at the end of this PowerPoint. Not that we won't go back to it, but there was some really good information just a couple of weeks ago. So with that, Reef, I'll turn it back to you. This was a great session again.
Yeah, it really was. So thank you everyone for taking the time to listen. I think thank you for even the attendees. I think you guys have been sending up some really good links that hopefully other people can use. I know Todd talked about the new normal, and I know he's the PR guy, but let me tell you, it's not the new normal. It's the abnormal. And that's going to continue, I think, for a while. I think this is some of the challenges that we're dealing with. And you've seen the numbers and the results. So if you look at what we are surrounded by in Minnesota, with Iowa, Wisconsin, South Dakota, North Dakota, we've got a big challenge. I mean, Iowa, Wisconsin, and South Dakota are over 20% infection rates. North Dakota is now over 10%, and Minnesota is still hovering around 5%. So I think you're going to see some challenges as we move forward. I do recommend that some of the superintendents let others know in your network if they get a chance to join this. I think it's a really helpful way to learn from each other. The next one is going to be October 23rd, and as Fred mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about the new types of what new types of testing are coming around the corner. And let me just, one thing I think, Todd, maybe a homework for you if you're not busy with all the communication stuff. As I listen to all the superintendents and what people are doing, and as a parent, I don't know if anybody really truly understands the effort, the work that is going on behind the scene. You know, I do appreciate what the teachers do. I think that's very important, and you need to highlight them. But I do think that we forget about that. So if there's anything we can do in terms of, putting together a case study or something like that, that we can really get out to the media so people truly understand the efforts that are being put together by the administrative staff, I think there's sometimes missed in terms of the effort they're putting in. So that's something for Todd when he's got nothing better to do, to talk to all his PR connections and put that out, because I think that's a hell of a story there, Todd.
And Arif, I just to localize this also beyond the mass media, this idea that we're using videos more and more, the idea that a teacher would spend 3 or 4 minutes showing how different their day is than it used to be, and something that you could use locally in your district. So that's a great idea, Arif.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll just end with this one quote I remember. So I also, when I went through some of the communication classes in college specifically, one of my professors talked about the fact that good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity. And I do think that what these districts are doing is really clarifying the information. And I think you're going to have to continue to do that. You can't stop, because I think this virus is going to continue for a while. So again, thank you for everybody for joining. Wish you the best. Have a great week, short week, and then we'll join again on October 23rd. Thank you.
And take care of yourself. Take a little break the next 2 days. You guys are working really, really hard. Spend some time with your family. Get out for a walk, even though it's cold. Get away from this for a bit and refresh your batteries a bit. I know that's what you need.
Great.
And thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.